most people that I work with, high achievers, ambitious types, are under acknowledging and under prioritizing their physical health. And there's real reasons for that. They're under incredible pressure. But yes, I think the rest is hugely important, and the physical health. When we stop telling ourselves we want the things that we don't really want, it creates so much more space, mental, emotional, physical space to focus on the things we really do. Optimism requires creativity and resilience of thinking. It requires us to look at what's happening and to be more creative about what potential solutions or other perspectives could be that could lead us to feel more hopeful, more energized, more productive.
Alex, if there's one message you'd like people to take away from this conversation, what might it be?
I would say to coming back to the idea of mind mobility, do whatever you can to cultivate that as a practice and start to be able to shift your own experience and observe your own experience, because that will allow you freedom.
For those who haven't encountered your work yet, perhaps you could share a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm an executive coach. I work with mostly sort of founder CEOs, consultants, and C-suites around the world. I started my career quite early in leadership, around sort of age 21. I was actually studying a Bachelor of Design, thinking that I was going to become an artist and designer. On the side was working in a role, and they offered me a leadership position, and I ended up taking on that position, growing in that company for 8 years, being known as the person who would take over new sites. It was a large retail business, take over new sites and turn around underperforming teams, helping them win awards. And it was mostly sales, and I was involved in the P&Ls, the training and leadership, the hiring, a lot at a young age, which is great. And then I decided to diversify and get out of that company into the big bad world, worked in big global companies, a few smaller startup companies, and then went back into sales leadership, found myself getting poached into a strategic role and hated it, which made me realize the thing that I had been loving all along, which was very specifically the coaching element of my work. So I started studying professional coaching on the side of my corporate job. I studied for 4 years and then started my business around it's almost 6 years ago now. And I absolutely love it. Have never looked back. And since, it's almost been a transition of living a life, coaching high performers and ambitious types, and also living a life and lifestyle where I'm getting to actually practice a lot of the concepts that we talk about in coaching and self-development. And that's really been my journey, getting to embody a lot of the things that we talk about and a lot of the concepts that I read about and explore. So
fulfillment is a topic we talk a lot about at the Resilience Institute. And in fact, my forthcoming book, Start With Values, features fulfillment as the top layer of the values pyramid. I know you are interested in this concept of fulfillment. So perhaps you could unpack what fulfillment is from your perspective and why it's important.
Yes, it's very fundamental to the work that I do and the message that I preach. So I remember probably 8, maybe 10 years ago when I really started exploring, I guess, personal development. I remember one of the first books I read was The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. And I can't remember if it was in that book or around the time of reading that book, that I'd always sort of thought that happiness was the goal. People spoke about happiness as the goal. And something people notice about me is I actually very intentionally never now refer to happiness as the goal, because what I discovered during that time was that happiness it's an elusive piece, and I don't believe that we're meant to be happy all the time, and that actually there was a almost a self-shame when attaching to that as the goal. And what I found was a much more sustainable goal and healthier, more resourceful goal to head towards was this feeling of contentment and aligning my day-to-day actions and the direction of my life and my goals with my values and what lit me up and what felt purposeful and in integrity for me and what I wanted. And within that, I can not be happy one day. I can be tired, I can be sick, I can be struggling even, and yet I'm okay not being okay. And there's a level of fulfillment and contentment knowing that I'm still showing up for a life that I have chosen.
This episode is brought to you by the Resilience Institute's new Resilience Assessment. It's designed to redefine how we understand and enhance organizational resilience with features like leadership lenses so that you can view your data from multiple perspectives. Imagine being able to understand mental health risk or well-being, resilience, even happiness within your organization and team by team. The tool features simplified scoring, and it's based on our robust and reliable resilience diagnostic and development framework. The resilience assessment is designed to equip leaders with the tools needed to support a thriving workplace. It's built on 2 decades of research, 5 rounds of psychometrics, and it will help you to identify risks like burnout before they affect your team, empowering you to build a healthier and more productive work environment. So click the link in the show notes below or visit resilienceeye.com and sign up for a demo. You can try it for yourself or book a demo for your team. The resilience assessment is where well-being meets performance, ensuring that your team not only survives, but thrives. Let's get back to the episode.
And that feels very different to the feeling of joy and happiness, which, as a symptom comes along more often with a life of fulfillment, but it's not necessarily the goal that I'm aiming for.
Interesting. I remember the founder of Resilience Institute once said to me, happiness is a temporary relief from suffering. And that really hit home because I realized there's this elusive thing, and it's not quite pleasure, and it's not quite achievement, and it's not quite joy, but we're all after this vague sensation of happiness when in fact values aligned action. We're on very similar paths in terms of how we believe we get there, leads to this thing called fulfillment. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what has brought you fulfillment, perhaps some of your adventures along the way.
Yeah. So one of the big turning points for me was all my life. So since being young, my father had always spoken about doing the Annapurna circuit in Nepal, and I'm a daddy's girl. And it always stuck with me. And I always had in my mind that I wanted to hike the Himalayas. And I always had 1,000 different stories as to why it was a bad time. I shouldn't, I couldn't, it would be sometime in the future. And I remember going through this process, and it was sort of my existential crisis period of really looking at myself and my life with a very critical eye. And I was feeling a lot of pain where I was. And I remember reading this line, say yes, then figure out how. And I decided in that moment to adopt that philosophy. And I thought, this is going to be my first test. And I knew there was going to be so much pushback externally to go, well, because there were legitimately plenty of reasons why I shouldn't and couldn't go hike in the Himalayas. Probably at this stage it was going to be on my own. But I just said, it doesn't matter. I'm doing it, and I'm going to figure out the how later. And I did. And of course, it all worked out. I figured out the how along the way. And I had one of the most spectacular experiences of my life. And, even hiking had been something I always loved, but being, a single female, I shouldn't do it alone. I don't have the fitness. I don't have the time. There was all these excuses. And I went there, and it was so transformative, and it helped me embody, we talk about potential, and I used to talk about potential, and I loved reading about it. And yet until I experienced that and got to embody what that felt like, I realized when you do the thing that your heart, your soul, whatever you want to call it, has longed for, there is this sense of infinite potential in there, which it sounds trite because people overuse it, but you have this, it feels like infinite energy to channel through there, even when your mind's saying, oh, you can't, there's no way you can keep hiking today, for example. There's no way you could have that level of commitment to reach a peak. And I overcome crazy obstacles. And while it was so difficult, there was no resistance to it because I knew exactly what I wanted.
Interestingly, I spent a lot of time in Nepal and did the Annapurna circuit as well. And it was one of the most memorable parts of my life. It was just incredible. And it's a real grind sometimes walking up endless staircases, just endless. They disappear into the clouds. But what I realized along the way is that all you need to do is stop and observe the view. And this is what we sometimes forget in our everyday lives, is just to stop and take a look at, wow, look how far we've come. And I still remember that to this day. It's really, a really important part of my own journey. I'd love to hear a little bit about how to achieve everything on your bucket list in 12 months.
Yeah, so this was a post. Actually, I'll mention one thing about what you just described that I
Yeah,
think
please.
is relevant. I actually did, I didn't end up doing Annapurna Circuit. I did the Peak of Gokyo Ri. And part of why I think that's relevant here is sometimes the picture that we choose, that gets to change. Like there can still be flexibility. I think having the really rigid goal is what holds a lot of people back. So
Yeah,
I knew what I wanted, but I had some cognitive flexibility in choosing it. So, yeah, I thought that was a
I like that.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what was the next? Yes, how to do everything on your bucket list in 12 months. So this has been my most popular piece of content. Every time I post
Yeah.
it, people absolutely love it. So this is based on my personal experience of prior to this. I always had this, pretty, collage on my wall. And I live in Manly. So of course, the first question that people ask when you say you live in Manly, generally speaking, is, oh, cool, do you surf? And I always wanted to surf. I had this picture of this cool, very attractive surfer chick with her surfboard on this board. And I also had the perfect body on this board, of course. I started training at a gym that was also trained fitness models. And what I realized through that experience was I saw firsthand what was actually genuinely required to have the body that I said that I wanted. I had said for years, and I'd poured enormous mental energy into saying, I want this thing. Then I got to see what was actually required. So I was forced to face, well, okay, if you want it, this is what you need to do. These are the sacrifices you'll need to make. This is what the life that having that looks like. And I realized I didn't actually want the thing. I wanted the idealistic vision of the thing, because ultimately my ego wanted it. And so what I did was then I got to look back at my bucket list and go, well, how many of these am I willing to do what it takes to actually have the thing? And by looking through that lens, I was actually able to disqualify a lot of what was on that list, because I realized, for surfing, for example, I didn't want to spend the thousands on the lessons. I wasn't willing to get dumped in the ocean, morning after morning. And once I cleared that off, there was this liminal space of feeling really uncomfortable with, oh gosh, well, what do I want? But that space allowed me to discover that I actually, deep down, what I really wanted to do was hiking and was Muay Thai and was start my own business. And so once I had those there and I knew what I needed, then I found out, okay, what do I need to do to have those things? And there was a total different energy. I was willing to do the very hard things to have those. What I wasn't willing to do was the really hard things to do, the other things my ego wanted. And it just transformed it. Now when I have a goal, I check in if it's really what I really want by looking at what I really tangibly need to do to have it. I ask myself if I'm willing to do it, and I do it. It's that easy. Who knew?
I love it, because so many of us have visions of the future or goals that are perhaps adding to our overall sense of anxiety because they're just unachievable. So rather focus on the things that you really want to invest in time and energy, and just do those and do them really well. And that will lead to fulfillment, because you will have actually mastered something rather than, have all of these unfulfilled threads waiting out there for attention that they may or may not get. I really like that. And having lived for many years in Manly, in Sydney, Australia, I can tell you that surfing can be less fun than you imagine. It's really crowded sometimes. So you have to go, part of your journey has to be going to other places to go surfing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's funny. That's, you mentioned a really big piece of it is when we stop telling ourselves where we want the things that we don't really want, it creates so much more space, mental,
Mm.
emotional, physical space to focus on the things we really do.
So, what about discipline fatigue? What are your thoughts?
So the discipline fatigue, I find, comes a lot from people that are, when you're pushing against the things that aren't fulfilling you. So I think there's so much noise. People love talking about discipline, and that's kind of the golden ticket or the key. And there's an element of this, but I think part of the issue is people are not yet first addressing the root, which is they're trying to force discipline on things they don't really want. It's a lot of shoulds. So almost every client I meet with, they're incredibly successful. They are very smart people, very intelligent people, most of them much smarter than I am. And their life, they're very capable and they're doing very well. This sense of that they're not doing enough and dissatisfaction is coming from the fact that they're trying to use discipline for a lot of things that they think they should do. And then they're beating themselves up for not having that discipline and doing them as well as they could or should. When in reality, it's because, of course, you're going to fatigue over time if you're trying to do it for someone else, not for yourself. It's this idea of, if you're only solely relying on extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation, it's going to get really hard.
Yeah, so true. And how important is rest and recovery from your perspective?
Personally, I think it's incredibly important, rest and recovery. I also find, like what I mentioned in terms of, in the Himalayas, I think we have, if we are aligned with something we really want, there is a far greater and enormous capacity to be able to channel into that thing. And yet I think that people have become so used to pushing beyond what feels healthy and resourceful for them that they've accepted that as the norm, and they're not really sure where their intuition is saying they actually need rest and recovery. They've almost disassociated from their bodies and mind signals that are telling them that. So I also am very conscious of when I need to rest. Like, I think there's a self-awareness of going, okay, when am I making an excuse and a reason? And when actually really makes sense for me to rest and recover right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think prioritizing physical health is huge. I think most people that I work with, high achievers, ambitious types, are under acknowledging and under prioritizing their physical health. And there's real reasons for that. They're under incredible pressure. But yes, I think the rest is hugely important, and the physical health.
Yeah, people reset their baseline. So peak performance or being in that peak zone becomes the standard. And then it's a big surprise when they burn out. Or we don't talk about burnout so much at Resilience Institute because we believe humans are regenerative systems. We can always recover, whereas a candlestick might burn out. But it is a surprise to many when they hit rock bottom and they're not quite sure how this happened, except for the fact that they've been on that hamster wheel or the treadmill at level 10 for a long, long time, and that's not normal.
No.
Athletes know very well that in order to sustain performance, you need to recover, and they turn recovery into a science, in fact. And I think that's a missing ingredient for so many people in the corporate world, is just giving themselves permission to stop, rest, recover, reflect, and then continue on the journey, right?
Yeah. And interestingly, it's when there's the saying that a lot of people in the corporate world will overuse. It's, oh, we here in our culture, we give 110%. And I always have to reflect to people that is so damaging. I mean, where that come from was for an athlete who is on a short sprint. It's for sprints. When you're talking about in the terms of culture, they're actually often talking about it in terms of all the time. It's like there is no such thing as, it's 100% is even too much to ask. Like, you can't expect people to give 100% all the time to their work. 110% is categorically damaging as an expectation. And to that point, like with athletes, the other thing, I train a lot around professional fighters, and they will train up to a fight. After a fight, if they're seen training that week, their coach will be saying, what are you doing here? Even a few days before the fight, they stop training. You know, there's, as you say, there's a science and an art that they are very conscious of and present to. And it's the coach's role, which I would say, you know, we could see as a leader's role to actually be observing their people and actually be saying to them, no, as your leader, as your coach, you know, I know you want to train right now and you want to work because there's more you could do, but it is the priority right now is rest, is stop.
Talk to us about emotional agility, or what you call mind mobility.
Yeah. So emotions are the one thing. So generally speaking, when I start with any client, one of the first tools that I bring up, which will tend to make them very uncomfortable at first, and it doesn't matter whether I'm working with a CEO or a brand new leader, it's always the most powerful, and it's the wheel of emotions. And the reason that I bring it up is you ask anyone how they feel, like what emotion they're actually feeling, and their range of vocabulary on it is, you know, one of five words, and it's usually either busy, stressed, good, bad, okay, you know.
Yeah.
Which half of those, they're not on the wheel. None of those are on the wheel. So being able to, like, it's first building this emotional literacy. So actually understanding what are the emotions that I'm feeling in response to this experience. One, because I also like to show people, like, emotions are data. They are providing you information about your experience and how you're responding and perceiving that experience. So how do we name exactly what it is so we can gain better quality data about what's going on for you? And then the agility part and the mobility part is, I think, in the self-development world, sort of if people are looking to do it themselves or at the shallower level, people will look to go, okay, I'm going to change my, you know, say I'll use the example of like affirmations. I'm going to do an affirmation. Now, there's an element of that where I'd say I would call that flexibility. You know, you're creating some flexibility there. Mobility is more so, if you think about it in a physical sense, it's being able to have that flexibility when under pressure and under tension. Most people, if they're saying affirmations, it's when they're at home in the mirror, comfortable on their couch. When they're in a high stakes, pressured situation, that affirmation probably isn't getting them out of that situation. So the mind mobility and the emotional agility is being able to name and be present with the emotions that are there, having the literacy on what they are and what information they're telling you, and being able to actually move yourself from that state to a different state through your own cognitive abilities, being able to look at that narrative, see what's creating that emotional experience, have the creativity and the tools to be able to craft a new story so that you can actually morph and shift your own experience of that reality. And I think that is one of the most powerful things to do. Like, that's the biggest gift of self-awareness and so important for leadership.
And I think you said something really important there, which is don't wait for that most intense high pressure moment to think, oh, I've got this tool called emotional agility or mind mobility. How do I use it again? You know, in the midst of let's say a rugby match, you don't have the fly half kicking for posts trying to remember a technique that they learned to calm their nervous system. They've practiced it in advance. So is it a case of, in everyday situations, encouraging people to say, I am feeling resentful because of this event, calm myself, what else, what are my options? And that gives you that flexibility rather than just thinking, okay, in the midst of intensity, I must remember to use a psychological tool.
Yeah, and this is interesting because this is a point I was discussing with a client of mine the other day, in that this is actually why I work with clients one-to-one for 6 months. So I will sometimes offer smaller packages, but I do not offer one-off sessions because I don't believe that they do what people need in terms of change. If you come to me, that if you describe something that I think I could solve in one session, fantastic. But over 6 months, what happens is they get to embody the patterns. So over 6 months, we get to use these similar or same practices in different contexts with different angles that might sound or look a little bit different, differently, and then over time they start to embody that practice. And I often hear them reflecting later after we've completed work together saying, oh, I find myself going, what would Alex say? And really that's just them prompting into the next stage of the process. So yeah, I think it's an embodiment of that, just becomes how you operate internally.
Any tips for someone who would like to try practicing that? Do you think the emotion wheel, which I'm a big fan of, I use it in workshops, is a great place to start to build that emotional literacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first step is the emotional literacy with the wheel. Second is really building that self-awareness around what's the story I'm telling myself right now, what meaning am I giving this event, what am I making this mean about me specifically. There's a lot of different kind of prompts someone can go to, but building that self-awareness of where are you now. And then the thing that I find most people find most tricky is then going, okay, so where do you want to be? What's the experience you want to be having? And let's look at the dissonance. Like, what would it look like to be there? What would you need to be believing in order to have that reality? Okay. And really coming at it from a sense of curiosity. I think people tend to bring a lot of self-judgment and asking. I'll often hear people go, yeah, but why? They want to find, they'll loop on, but why am I here? But why am I here? And I find when people stay there, we're so used to hearing why is a productive question that they think that's productive, but it's actually just to loop and to self-shame and stay where they are. Instead, look at it just really curiously and kind of analyze it a little bit more like a scientist. Like, okay, step back a little bit more neutrally. And then look at where you want to be. What would it look like to be there? See how you can get there using your thoughts and the story that you're telling.
It's so amazing that people have been thinking about this kind of thing for thousands of years, all the way from ancient Greece, Stoicism, through to cognitive behavioral therapy. When I think about it, humans have been trying to understand, build self-awareness, understand themselves, and understand these things called emotions, which drive action, and find ways to put things in perspective for such a long time. It's quite incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I love reading philosophy and all the different philosophies. And it is always something that reminds me. And it sort of makes you optimistic, and also there's a humility to it too, to realize that, we have been talking about these same things for a while. And yet it also tells me that so many people can be utilizing these skills, and they're still around. We still read these people's works because it's relevant and it works.
You said a powerful word there, which is humility. I would love to hear your thoughts on integrity and humility as being fundamental for resilience.
Yeah. So the niche that I work with, I would say that the types of people I work with, I would absolutely describe as high integrity people. And I find it absolutely key for resilience. And the combination with humility is really important. The integrity piece, none of us are perfect. The humility piece goes, I am human. I am going to make human mistakes. I'm going to make errors of judgment. I do have biases. I do have doubts. I have an ego, and it is going to come out at times. And of course, we want to get as aware as we can to be resourceful in those actions, and also acknowledge that humanness. And I think that's the humility piece for me. The integrity is knowing that, acting as best that we can, knowing that when we are honest and true, when we keep our word to ourselves, to other people as best we can, when we make decisions aligned with our values because we have been reflective, we have brought in self-awareness, we have maybe had reflections from other people, regardless of the outcome, like sometimes the outcome, it won't go as we want things to go. That's not how life works. But I think if we are in integrity with those things, with our values, with our truth, with the truth, there's a peace that comes with that. So regardless of the outcome, we can go, okay, I did the best that I could. And now I'm going to deal with the consequences, because I can have a sense of grounded knowing and peace that, okay, it was the best that I could, and I get to learn from this and move forward. When we're not in integrity, when we know that actually we kind of didn't fully tell the truth there, we sort of manipulated this situation, avoided X, when there's a consequence, deep down, even though our ego might try and defend it, we feel shame, we feel guilt, we know that we played a part in that outcome, and that's when often the ego will go to defend as well. So I think the humility to be able to bring compassion when we don't align to our absolute best and choose to learn from it, and don't make ourselves, better or worse than anyone else for those situations. But just doing the best that we can, and being as honest and true as possible with ourselves and with others.
How important are your core values and actually being clear about your core values as part of this journey?
I don't consciously think about my values. I know for a lot of people, it's something that they will have on their wall or have, listed, and it's something they refer to a lot. That's not something I personally feel. And yet values, I think for me, have always been very present. I would say that's something I have had that's reasonably unique, because I've always had quite a strength of character and strong values, and integrity is one that's very, very strong for me. And yet I actually remember there being points in my life where, sort of around teens and early in 20s, actually drawing a line in the sand around integrity, and actually saying I didn't like how it felt to lie. And it was even in little things like when it was uncomfortable to say no to someone, so I would make up an excuse. And I remember just going, I don't want, that's not how I want to act. It's not how I want to live. Yes, it's going to take more energy and effort for me to be really honest, and it's going to be uncomfortable. But I drew a line in the sand, and I was like, that's the standard I'm now keeping. I won't choose comfort over integrity and honesty.
Yeah, it's such an important point. I mean, life is so much, there is way less stress in life when you choose that path, just to be honest and truthful. I mean, the load is incredible. I remember for a long time, I felt inadequate and I would miss deadlines and things like this. In my early 20s, I was unreliable. I was a 20-something-year-old guy. I had other things on my mind. And once you move to the next phase where you discover, yeah, for me, core values had always been there and they were a driving force. It was creativity, fitness, and perhaps freedom to some extent, maybe kindness, but they evolved over time as well. And I just found living in alignment with those, which is a form of integrity and builds confidence, which is trust in yourself. And there's way less mental load because you're not having to try and remember stories that you've told people. And, there is a lot of freedom in that, even though it may be uncomfortable.
Oh, so true. And I think for a lot of women, it's people pleasing, and that people pleasing in a form, there's so much mistruth that comes along with that, and finding excuses for not doing things or saying yes. Ultimately, the lie that they're often telling is yes, when what they really mean is no. And there's so much freedom that comes with that. And you're right, you've nailed a few of my other values that I now live much closer in alignment with, like freedom. Absolutely. And there's so much peace in knowing that you are choosing your life and that you've been honest.
And people pleasing leads to resentment, even though it's a kind of quiet resentment. It's that poison that you create for someone else and drink yourself. And I think it's so unhealthy. Whereas dealing with the discomfort of creating boundaries and saying no gives you another level of freedom, and people will trust you more because they go, okay, well, that's your boundary. Great. At least we're clear.
I often say that it absolutely creates so much more trust with others. When people know where they stand with you, and they know that if you mean no, you'll say no, they feel more open to come to you and ask for things. It's actually far more generous to be honest, because then people can actually come to you. They can actually ask for help, knowing that you'll be honest about whether you're available and have the capacity or not.
Tell me about cultivating a resilient mindset from your perspective.
I think it's about a combination of all the things we've probably spoken about. It's aligning with values, knowing that you're choosing what you are doing. I think a lot of people, it's very easy to blame and feel helpless or disempowered that, the life they're leading isn't really what they want. I think realizing that you are choosing it and being taking full responsibility for your own experience and your own life. Not to say that bad things happen, but taking responsibility for where you are and your ability to change that. And being honest and true to yourself, and having this emotional literacy and this relationship with your own experiences that allows you to come back from difficult experiences and to examine them and examine yourself and bring yourself back to centeredness and groundedness and awareness.
I've heard you mention taking the perspective of cosmic insignificance. What does that mean?
I find fascinating astronomy, and there's something about the vastness, when you lie and you look at the stars, or you actually like look into, following NASA on Instagram, or looking into these things and just realizing there is so much that is absolutely mind blowing about what we do know. So I don't feel the need to look at things that we actually don't really know and that we're sort of making up, which is, get upset a few people by saying this, but here's the astrology element. I go like, look at what we're actually seeing is out there in the universe, and knowing that, the millions of light years that these places are away, and it brings so much perspective. And I think there's such a liberation, that internal liberation and peace that you can, when you're caught up in your mind about certain things, that perspective can help you just go, okay, like it's in the scheme of things, this isn't really super important and I'm probably going to be okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. In fact, I think I posted something on one of the social platforms about we're here for just this blink of eternity. Shouldn't we be celebrating that we're all here together for this moment, observing this unfolding of whatever it is that we don't really understand? And I love how Alan Watts said, we are apertures through which the universe views itself. And I just think, yeah, it's so incredible. When you zoom right out, our problems are so tiny. And you even just put into perspective what other people have achieved despite adversity and challenge. And I think that makes you more resilient. I'm with you on that one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Something one of the things that I often do, you will usually see me watching sunrise or sunset. And there's something also about that. Like, to me, there's a divine in every day. I don't need there to be a heaven. I look out here and at life and what is in front of me and go, wow, and I'll often look out to the horizon and imagine all the people that could be on the other side of that and what their lives and days look like. It's the same reason actually I love being at heights and flying. Again, this perspective of being able to view other people and create this perspective of just kind of seeing humans go about their day and realize, oh, I'm just one of those little tiny things doing that. Yeah, there's a freedom in that I sense.
Do you want to know a cool word? You may know it. It's Sonder, Sonder, which means it's that moment when you realize that all of these other people around us have lives that are as vivid and intense as our own. And it's a real experience when you step back and look at people as you just described, and you realize that each one of them has got hopes and dreams and stress and joy and families and things they care about. And I don't know, it just opens a gateway to empathy and to, I suppose, deeper respect for each other.
Brilliant. I didn't know there was a word for it, but that is something when I'm people watching, that's often kind of what I'll be reflecting on or contemplating. So I love that. Sonder. Okay.
Sonder. Cool word.
Fine. Very cool word.
How can we be optimistic without shifting into toxic positivity or Pollyanna optimism?
Oh, I haven't heard Pollyanna optimism. Um, yeah. So I think there was sort of a phase, I think people are sort of starting to come out of it now, but on social media, where it was all about being fearless and, positive affirmations. And while I appreciate these things, I'm also a little bit for semantics. I I think that these notions, like being fearless, for example, that's not the goal. You are never not going to have fear. You are human. By saying that the goal is, or alluding even to the fact that we want to be fearless, it's rejecting the humanness. It's the embracing, the opposite of it is actually what leads to the high performance and the resilience. It's being able to feel my fear and feel totally okay with that, to be in grief and be okay with that. So I think when it comes to the toxic positivity, it's usually disassociating a little bit from our actual experience. So what I do say about optimism though, is because I'm definitely an optimist, and there's this funny notion where people actually assume there's a perception that people that are cynical or pessimistic are more intelligent. And yet, my notion is that the fact that we know about negative bias, I mean, we are biologically almost wired to flip to the negative. So I try to interrupt that pattern of thinking by saying that's sort of the lazy option. Like, wouldn't pessimism or cynicism be the lazy option if we already wired for negative bias? So when there's shit situations and like bad stuff happening, optimism requires creativity and resilience of thinking. It requires us to look at what's happening and to be more creative about what potential solutions or other perspectives could be that could lead us to feel more hopeful, more energized, more productive. Because I think the other thing about having a more negative mindset is it's largely unproductive. You're going to be less motivated to take action or make change if you think there's no hope, you know? A lot of people will often find that they start to, it's their way to create connection is to complain. So there's the creativity of and problem solving that leads to a more positive outcome. But I think about it less as let's just mask it with avoid what's happening, avoid the reality of the situation. Instead, look at the reality of the situation and let's create a creative problem, a solution to what we're observing as the problem. Or there's a line that I love: faith and fear have one thing in common, and it's that they both require us to believe in something that hasn't happened yet. So you can either, dwell on the fear, or you can also look at what faith would look like and choose that instead, because it feels better for no other reason than it feels better, or because it's going to be more productive.
A lot of people become habituated to just the negativity bias, and it's kind of like everything's terrible, those guys are bad, blah blah blah. But that's a choice, and I suppose positivity is a practice in that it's not just you're going to be an instant optimist. It's kind of like it's an active engagement with the world. I am choosing. I could go down that path or open that door, but the universe has another door here, so I'm going to see what's down there, and it generally works out better. I think I read that people who practice positivity live up to 7 years longer than those who don't, which for me is a pretty good reason to adopt a positive outlook.
It's a great incentive. And you're right, it's a practice. Like there have been times in my life, I think part of this would come from, so late in my teens, I actually suffered from clinical depression. And part of what was coming out of that was a lot of work in retraining my brain. So I have seen the power of being able to go from 0 to 100. And since then, I have led a life. I mean, I've even had, they've done psychometric tests on me once and actually thought I was cheating because my happiness, scores were so high. And when they called to retest, I went, oh no, she's actually that happy. But that's because I have cultivated that mindset through practicing it daily.
Yeah. Speaking of daily, how important are daily rhythms, practices, habits? What are your thoughts? And what do you practice?
Nice. Yeah. So I'm very specific in, I don't say routine. I do say rhythm. Sort of this military style goal of having a very rigid routine. It doesn't fit a lot of people's lives, and what can end up happening is a lot of people that have an all or nothing mindset, or the, I'll say quote unquote A types that I work with, if they miss a day or they miss a week, they fall off. A daily rhythm, to me, it encompasses and allows for life to happen. It allows for intuition to be able to say, actually, today it would actually be better for me to do this instead. Or, this, I actually have to prioritize, my kids today, or I'm sick. So it allows more generosity and compassion of like life happening.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work for some people. A routine works better. I'm very aware of that. But in terms of daily rhythms, I say that to say I don't do these things every day. I sort of have a toolkit of things that I pay attention to. Okay, like what do I want to bring into my rhythm or my daily dance at the moment that feels good and feels helpful and supportive? And a few of those things that I would do most of the time is get up for sunrise. I train at least 4 times a week, whether that's Muay Thai or strength training. I walk, I'd say this one is pretty much a routine for me. I walk 10,000 steps a day, minimum. And I do have a journal practice, which I do 3 wins, 3 gratitude, 1 lesson, at least 1 lesson. It usually ends up being a few more. The wins piece there is the one that I recommend for most people that they're not already doing. I think a lot of people talk about the gratitude. The wins is so transformative for the high achievers and the ambitious types that do tend to doubt themselves and wait for these kind of big achievements, and even then don't tend to celebrate them much. Being able to find those little wins in every day, I think, creates a lot of resilience and a much better mindset for those people. Other than that, I'd sometimes bring in other things. I have done consistently meditation over the years. I go through periods of doing it, not doing it, morning pages, journaling, a few things like that.
Amazing. So what does a typical coaching process look like when you engage with someone? You start off and what does the 6-month or longer process look like?
Yeah, so to start off, I always have a call with someone first to make sure it's a fit. And then the process looks like I have a questionnaire that they go through that's asking some uncomfortable questions just to really help us get a little bit beneath the layers in where they are now and where they want to be, why they are where they are right now, why they want to be where they want to be. And then from there, we do 2 sessions a month over those 6 months. So we get 12 real deep dive sessions, and they guide the focus of the sessions, which is often uncomfortable. The types that I work with come and go, great, what's your structure? What are we going to be working on here, and here? And part of my work as a coach is actually to get them to realize that we can be guided without that really clear structure, and trust that you can trust me, we're going to get where you want to be. And the other part that makes that potent is that it's much more powerful to coach someone on something that they're really currently experiencing versus an anecdotal, like, oh, I might have this happen in the future, can we talk about it? So by them coming and saying, they answer 3 questions. 1, what are you celebrating right now? What are you finding tricky? What do you want to focus on? And what I find over that 6 months is, at first they'll come and go, oh, there's nothing I'm celebrating, and I'll have to challenge them, push them to find something that they're celebrating themselves for. But what's tricky and what they want to focus on, they can give me a whole list. By around month 4, they start to have 10 things they're celebrating themselves for, and they'll come and go, oh, actually, I don't know what I want to focus on today. And that's when I know it's perfect, because now we've really built, like as one of my clients said, we sort of filled all the plugs in the boat, and we get to really build up from there. And they're at a place of, I don't know what I don't know. In other words, like, they didn't know it could get this good, and now they're there. We can go, great, and I get to kind of guide and help them see what could actually be even better from here.
How can people get in touch with you? Where would you like them to go to read your articles and to potentially connect as a coach?
Well, the best place is LinkedIn for me. I spend most of my time there, and I do on Instagram is sort of my lifestyle and travel stuff that I'll dip in and out of. I had my business there originally, and then I realized LinkedIn is far better for my style of content. I like to go deep and talk about nuance and have intelligent conversations about the concepts I speak to. So LinkedIn would be the best place.
Excellent. We'll include all of those links in the show notes, plus some other links that we spoke about. I think we've spoken about many, many different things today. Any final thoughts for our listeners who stuck with us all the way to the end?
Yeah, well, thank you for sticking to the end if you stuck here. Final notes. I think for people that are feeling inspired to work with a coach, whether it's me or someone else, I really encourage them to do it if they haven't. It's changed my life. I think that this work is incredibly profound for so many people, and I get to see, the effects it's had on all the people I've worked with. And it's a huge privilege for me. But I also see it helps them have more fulfilling lives and have better relationships and improved health, and that's really huge. And also start to build a relationship with your own emotions and get honest about what you want and really look at where you're shooting. Get really honest about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you all for tuning into another episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes, and we'll see you next time.